Homeowners generally enjoy attracting wildlife to their property and landscape, but sometimes wildlife can cause damage or become a nuisance. And there's different ways we can deal with this wildlife damage. Usually the first thing people think about is lethal control. Often though, that's the most impractical, because if you still have the resource that was attracting that wildlife to your property, you're probably going to have a continual problem trying to control these animals. Sometimes it can work if you just have one offending animal, but often it's just a continual effort on your part. Other ways that you might control wildlife are things like habitat modification. Now, this is not typically practiced by homeowners, but it generally is very effective. And for the home landscape, the most practical way to do this is just change the type of plants that are in your landscape. Use things that aren't as palatable for deer or rabbits, for instance. And this is usually pretty easy and eliminates the problem, although if you've got specific plants that you want in the landscape, it might not be practical. You can also try things like exclusion. We use netting or fencing to keep the resource away from the offending animal. Very effective, often 100%. It can be quite costly up front, but if it solves your problem for 15 years, it's worth the investment. Repellents are used a lot. Generally, they don't work. There are some instances where they can, but generally they have to be applied constantly every time it rains, and they just generally degrade with sunlight. So this is not very practical under most cases unless you have a very small resource that's being impacted, like maybe one plant. Another thing that you can consider is frightening, and for some wildlife this is very effective. For whitetailed deer it can work quite well, and we use things like noise, flashers, sometimes dogs. Generally you have to mix this up and do different things and use it in combination with other methods before it's effective. And that's kind of a general rule for any type of wildlife damage management, is that they're most effective when they're used in combination with each other. In other words, rather than just doing one thing, if you do multiple things and kind of mix it up, that usually helps reduce damage. But this is all really damage mitigation. You're never going to completely eliminate damage from your landscape or your home. You're always going to have some type of damage, and what you really need to consider is what your personal tolerance is for that damage. Some people have a very high tolerance, especially for certain species that they enjoy seeing. Others have a low tolerance, and this is a personal decision, and it will determine how much effort and expense that that will be warranted to control that wildlife species in your landscape. So think about that before you really spend a lot of effort or money when you're having damage, is whether it's really worth your time and effort to try to deal with that, because often the damage will be very superficial, more of a nuisance than an actual cost, and so you just need to kind of weigh the pros and cons of control. If you'd like additional information on wildlife damage management control, there's a few websites you might want to check out. First is the Internet Center for Wildlife Damage Management, and that is ICWDM. It's got information on all different types of species that might be impacting your landscape with proven techniques that work. Another website, if you're having difficulty with wildlife in an agriculture setting, would be to check out aphis.usda.gov, and this is USDA's Wildlife Services Division. And finally, if you're wanting someone to help you trap in Oklahoma or to help control wildlife in an urban setting, you can contact one of the nuisance wildlife control operators that are licensed through the state, and you can find a list of those by county at wildlifedepartment.com. One of the most common complaints that we get from homeowners is armadillo damage, and this is pretty much a turf grass issue. Sometimes they'll get in flower beds as well, but they're digging for soil-borne insects like grubs and earthworms. So what happens, particularly in the summer, is we keep our lawn very irrigated, and the soil is moist, loose, easy for armadillos to forage in, and a lot of these animals that they are trying to forage for come close to the surface. So we create a really good food plot for armadillos. A lot of the things that people try for armadillos just really don't work, like repellents. It's not effective. You can use exclusion, particularly for small areas. Like if you have a small flower bed, a very short fence will keep an armadillo out. They don't climb very well, they don't typically jump. So something as short as, a 12-inch fence or 15-inch fence would certainly be effective. And for small areas, this might work. But if we're talking about a large turf area or a golf course or a football field that you're trying to keep the turf from being damaged, this is probably going to warrant trapping. So we're talking lethal control for armadillos. And fortunately, they're really easy to trap, and you don't even have to bait the trap. Some people will use rotten eggs as a bait, but generally I don't, and it's not really necessary. With armadillo trapping, what you're trying to accomplish is to basically corral the animal into the trap. They don't see very well. They generally keep their head down when they're foraging, so if they hit a barrier, they typically follow it. So what we look for in the landscape is try to identify the place where we're seeing some damage from armadillos. And here we have fresh damage where we've been irrigating these tomatoes. What we've done here is set a trap, and we're using existing structures and barriers to kind of make our job a little easier. So we have a home here that's a barrier and some dense plants that they're not going to move through, some tomatoes. So we've put up a small fence just to kind of corral the armadillo into this trap. Now you do want to use a large live catch trap for armadillos. This is a 10 by 12 inch opening, and you can use ones that have either one opening like this trap or those that have openings on both ends. And in that case, we would put a fence on both ends to try to corral the animal. That would be more effective because you really don't know which way the armadillo is coming, but this will still work. So we've put this fence here, and hopefully we'll corral him. Now once you capture the armadillo, you want to be careful not to handle it. They do carry leprosy. It's the only other mammal besides humans that carry leprosy. Very unlikely that you would come in contact with that disease, but just as a precaution, wear gloves when you're handling the trap that an armadillo has been in. And it's not legal to move this animal and release it somewhere else, but it is legal to kill the animal year-round. They're not protected in Oklahoma, so a quick shot to the base of the neck with a .22 will humanely kill that armadillo. And that's going to be the most effective way to deal with armadillo damage. Now something else you can do is to try to cut back on irrigation. And that might be an effective option for a Bermuda grass lawn that you can just allow to go dormant. Obviously for fescue it's not going to work. Beaver are a really important wildlife species. They create a lot of wetlands that other wildlife species rely on, but occasionally they do create problems, both for timber production and also in just lawns that happen to have wetlands nearby. One of the big problems is girdling trees, where they actually can damage tree or kill the tree, fell it, and what they're after is the cambium. They eat the inner bark of the tree. So if you've got valuable trees that are susceptible to beaver damage, like softwooded species, cottonwoods, maples, poplars, etc., willows, you need to wrap those. You can wrap them with a wire mesh, and a beaver, when it's standing up, it's going to be about up to your waist. So the wire needs to be about that tall, and keep it a couple inches off of the bark so that you don't yourself girdle that tree with the wire. But that'll be enough to protect those trees, and that's a simple fix for that problem. If you need to trap the beaver, if there's just too many trees, or if they're causing problems in your pond levee, then the best thing to do is call a nuisance wildlife control operator. You can find those on Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation's website. The reason I say that is beaver, they're not too difficult to trap the first time, but if you ever miss them, they become very, very difficult to catch. And so they wise up quickly. So if you've never trapped a beaver before, it's probably best just to call a professional to do that. If they are burrowing into your pond levee, that's probably your best solution. And then you're going to have to look at the damage in that levee and see if you're going to need to put some type of fill in there. If you do decide to trap a beaver yourself, one of the things to look for is a slide. This is an area where they enter and leave the water. It's pretty easy to see. The vegetation will be matted down. A lot of times the mud will be slicked off, and there'll even be a muddy water if they've entered recently. And you can also see tracks if the soil is soft enough. So that's a good place where you would set your traps. If they're clogging up a water pipe under a road or a water control structure on a pond or wetland, that's actually an easy fix. You're just going to build some type of structure around that water control structure or that inlet pipe that keeps the beaver from getting right at the inlet. Basically what you're going to do is create a fence, a barrier. And there's several websites online that you can get designs to do this, but essentially you're going to create just a large barrier around that small intake pipe so that the beaver has a difficult time putting enough material to stop water flow, and that should solve that problem. It's a little bit of an expense, but it'll save you a whole lot of effort down the road. A growing wildlife problem here in Oklahoma is from feral pigs. These are not native to the state or to the country. They're from Europe originally, although a lot of the ones that we see here in the Oklahoma area are actually domestic pig that have gotten loose or been released intentionally, and they're spreading pretty rapidly. They're in lots of the area in the southern part of the state and the eastern part of the state, although they're scattered broadly across most of Oklahoma. And pig damage is pretty easy to identify. First of all, the tracks are similar to a deer, but they're a little more rounded, and after you've looked at a few, you can tell them apart. They root a lot into the soil. They'll be pushed up areas, often in Bermuda grass pastures or in forested areas where they're looking for acorns. But unlike armadillo or something else, these aren't just localized little scratchings. These are usually broad areas where they've worked for quite a while, and there'll be massive soil disturbances concentrated. And this can cause a loss of plant material, but also some erosion in some instances. They also, you'll see in a lot of forested areas where there's water, where they have rubbed mud on the side of the tree. That's a good way to identify pig damage. And it's usually up, 2-3 foot off the ground. And they're constantly wallowing in mud and then rubbing themselves on trees. And so you'll see that the mud caked on the tree, or just a wallowed area where it looks like the vegetation's all beat down and there's fresh mud where they've been rolling. These are all good indications that you have pigs. And if you do, they're very difficult to control. Exclusion really is not practical in almost no situation. So you're almost always going to be dealing with lethal control with pigs. They're not protected, so you can kill them year-round. A lot of people try to just shoot them incidentally to deer hunting, or just driving around checking their crops or cattle. Generally what this will do is make you feel like you've done something, but really it'll just educate the pigs to not come out in the daytime and only come out at night. So it's not really that practical as reducing damage levels. What you want to try to do is trap them. So trapping is going to be the effective way to deal with pig problems. And since the pigs are traveling in these sounder groups, it might be anywhere from 5 to 20 animals, we want to catch that entire group in one trap event. These pig traps that you'll see marketed that catch 1 or 2 pigs at a time, typically what will happen there is that'll educate the rest of that sounder to not get near bait or a pig trap. So we want a large trap, and preferably a trap that's rounded, has no corners, because if you have corners, a large group of pigs, they'll pile on top of each other and some of them will escape. So you can use something like cattle panels and bend them in a circular fashion over a pretty large area. I mean, big enough that 30 or 40 pigs could theoretically fit in there. And you can use just T-posts to fasten that securely to the ground, and they will root under, so you want to really secure this strongly to the ground, and you need to check this trap often, every day. So we want to pre-bait for some period of time, a week or so, get the pigs used to coming in with the door open, and then engage the door. And a door that is some type of swing door that allows pigs to come in but not back out, that's probably the preferable trap design, but you can use some type of trap door as well, where they'll hit a stick and release it, although those are not quite as effective. There's lots of good trap designs on the internet. Probably the best resource locally, the Noble Foundation has an excellent publication on dealing with feral pig problems, and they've got really good trap designs in there that you can check out. You can also call Wildlife Services, that's a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. If pigs are damaging an agricultural crop, which includes timber resources, then Wildlife Services might be able to help you with trapping, at least technical assistance, if not, in some cases, maybe providing some actual trap time for you. So I hope these tips will help you dealing with pigs, that they're a growing problem in Oklahoma, but they are something that you can at least manage the damage levels. Many homeowners have cats, and they're one of the most popular domestic animals in the United States, but there's a few things you might not know about cats. They can be really detrimental to native wildlife. It's estimated they kill about 1 billion birds in the U.S. annually. They're also pretty hard on reptiles, particularly snakes that are great natural rodent control, and they kill a lot of game birds, pheasant, bobwhite quail, but also things like cottontail rabbit. So if you're going to have cats, it's a good idea to try to keep them indoors as much as possible. Unfortunately, declawing cats really is not that beneficial. They're still capable of killing native wildlife, and even if they're well fed, they have the natural instinct to hunt. It's just what they are. They're predators. So if you're trying to attract wildlife to your property or increase the abundance of wildlife on a property, it's a good idea to try to limit the amount of time that a cat spends outdoors. In urban situations, Canada geese can cause quite a few problems. Primarily, they're a nuisance because of their droppings on sidewalks and running trails in city parks. Also on golf courses, they can be problematic. They can often be aggressive towards the public, especially during nesting season. And for these reasons, oftentimes people want to try to limit the number of Canada geese in these residential or urban areas. There are a few things you can do. Generally, things like repellents aren't going to work very well. And because geese are federally protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, lethal control is not always an option. If they are resident geese, in other words, geese that do not migrate in and out of the state, you do have some more options. What I would suggest you do is contact a nuisance wildlife control operator, and you can find a list of these by county on the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation's website, and they can often help with trapping or harassment. Harassment does work in some situations. You have to be pretty persistent at it, and that's why it's best to call a professional if at all possible. And usually what they're going to do is a combination of several things. Sometimes you'll see them actually use these silhouettes that look like a dog or a wolf. These can be effective if they're used in combination with live dogs, but used alone or just stand alone and not moving them around, generally they're not too effective. Keeping geese from roosting on large bodies of water can help to keep them off the adjacent grassy areas where they're feeding. However, that is generally completely cost prohibitive because we're going to have to put some type of wire grid system over the water body, and generally that's just not going to be practical except on very small bodies of water. Golf courses sometimes do this, but for the homeowner or for a residential area, that's just not going to be practical. Now, if you have geese in an agricultural setting that are feeding on, let's say, wheat crop, then if these are birds that are migratory, which they typically are in the winter when they're impacting our wheat crops, then those can be hunted during the applicable hunting seasons. And you can check the Department of Wildlife Conservation's website to see when hunting seasons are. And usually with a little bit of hunting pressure, you can at least move those off of your field temporarily. But generally for urban setting, calling a nuisance wildlife control operator is going to be your best bet. One of the things that almost every homeowner is going to face at some time is a struggle with either mole or gopher. And while they both live underground, that's really where the similarities end. So the first step is to identify what you're dealing with. Is it a mole or a gopher? Because they're not the same and their food habits are very different. Moles feed almost exclusively on soil-borne insects. They eat a lot of grubs. They also eat a lot of earthworms. So they're actually pretty beneficial. They also aerate the soil, and they can cause some damage issues, but far less than gophers, who feed primarily on plant material. They eat a lot of roots, not only of turf, but also things that might be a little more prized and precious, things like hostas. In fact, if you ever see hostas just die overnight for no apparent reason, pretty good chance that it was a gopher. Now, the two animals do differ in the soil types that they're found in. Moles are really common in lots of different soils, but gophers are pretty specific to sandy soil. You generally won't find gophers very commonly in tight clay soils. So you can kind of gauge what you might be dealing with by the soil type you have, but the damage that you see on the surface really is telling. If you see these long runs, kind of like we have here in front of us, where it's just pushed up soil near the surface, that's generally a mole. They generally stay really close to the surface. Gophers, on the other hand, generally burrow deeper, and they push out soil from their burrow and form these large conical kind of volcano-shaped mounds. And a lot of times that's the only surface damage that you see are these large mounds spread across the landscape. That's a gopher. Generally, gophers are going to warrant some type of control if it's in your landscape. If it's a mole, that's just going to be your personal tolerance, whether it's aesthetically not pleasing to you to see these tunnels, or if you're stepping in them. Sometimes you can have some erosion, or you have, a lot of mole activity and not a lot of turf grass and a big rain. And also sometimes moles will push up shallowly rooted annuals like pansies. But primarily with moles, it's an aesthetic issue, not an actual damage. Now, let me show you how to control either one of them. The first thing to do is identify where the run or the tunnel is. With a mole, that's easy because you can see it. With a gopher, it's a little more difficult, and usually what we'll do is we would actually go to the conical mound and use some type of object to probe around that mound until you hit a soft spot where the probe readily sinks down. And that's where your tunnel is. Once you've identified that tunnel, and you want to look for fresh tunnels. You might have lots in your yard, but try to pick the ones that look the most fresh. Or if you're dealing with a gopher, the mound that looks like it's the most recently constructed. So then we're going to dig that tunnel out, and I've already dug this out. Just use a small spade. Be very careful not to collapse a lot of soil down into that tunnel. You want to leave it as minimally disturbed as possible so that when an animal comes through, it's not aware that something's been digging in its burrow system. So the best way to control these animals is trapping. There's lots of different traps you can use. This is a good one. It's just a simple trap that basically has these prongs that will grab the animal and a pan that they'll trip. Now the problem with this type of trap that I'm holding here is it only works for one direction. So if you're using this type of trap, you actually want to use two of these and set them back to back like this. All right, so that way you can get the mole or gopher regardless of which direction it's coming from. And we're going to actually, once these are set, we would put these actually down in the burrows back to back, and you can do a couple things to retrieve them. The simplest is just to dig them out and pull them out. You can tie some twine or something and run it to the surface if you want a little easier extraction. Whatever works for you. But then the trick here is once those traps are down in the burrow and set, we're not actually going to put soil back over that, because if you do, you might trip the trap, but certainly it's going to be hard for that trap to trip when an animal comes through there. So we're actually going to cover this opening with something that's really opaque and it's not going to let light in. Moles and gophers, since they live underground, they can't see very well, but they can see light. So we want to put a thick piece of burlap or plywood, whatever you've got handy that will just keep light out of that hole. And then every few days you can come by and check it. But if you've put this in an active tunnel, you're probably not going to have to wait more than a day before you catch that animal. And one thing to remember, a lot of homeowners call and say, I've just got hundreds of gophers in my yard. No, you probably only have 2 or 3. They're territorial, and even moles generally aren't just super abundant. You might only have a couple of animals that you have to capture in the yard, and they can actually, just a couple animals can create a lot of tunnels. So don't feel like you've got just lots of animals to capture. But one thing about trapping that you need to remember is that it's going to be a perpetual thing. They're going to come back. So you need to decide what your tolerance is and if it's really worth this perpetual trapping. Now, a lot of people want to turn to some type of toxicant. If you're going to use toxicant, I would recommend zinc phosphide. It's generally fairly safe for non-target animals that might consume a mole or gopher that has ingested the toxin. But like any toxin, it can kill other animals that you're not intending to in the right dosage. So if a stray dog or cat, or your dog or cat, ingests several moles that have ingested this toxicant, it could cause some health problems. Probably not going to, but because of that issue, I would recommend that if you use a toxicant, you only put it in the burrow system. Don't put any on the surface. That's not going to do you any good anyway, because these animals are underground. So you got to put it actually in the tunnels. And then you want to check your landscape every morning for animals that have come to the surface and died, because that's what they generally do when they ingest this toxicant. So you want to pick those up so that your dog or a cat or a raptor is not going to consume those animals, and then properly dispose of them. But trapping is by far the safest method. You know you're only going to catch what you're intending to, and it's actually pretty easy to capture them. Now, if you've got a flower bed or something that you just want to keep them out of, you can use exclusion. To do this, use wire, a galvanized fence, something that's not going to rust very rapidly in the soil, and bury it, laterally, about 18 inches deep. Alternatively, you can take a 24-inch piece of wire and bend it at a 90-degree angle, 12 inches is where the bend would be, and put the bend facing outward from the flower bed, and then bury that, and that'll keep animals from burrowing into that area. A lot of homeowners have complaints about skunks. This is primarily striped skunk, which is the most common species distributed across Oklahoma. Usually the complaints are turf damage, which can look really similar to armadillo turf damage. Often it's a little more rounded and maybe not quite as large of a disturbed area, but it can look very similar, and unless you see the animal causing the damage, sometimes it's hard to know which one you have, armadillos or skunks. Another problem is skunks getting in under homes or under structures and spraying. They also get into food storage and garbage cans. Now, the garbage and food storage is easy. Use bungee cords to keep them from opening lids, and use metal containers to keep them from chewing into bird seed or cat food, things like that. If you do have a skunk, like it's doing damage to your turf, we want to use a smaller trap than we would for an armadillo, like a 7 by 7 inch opening. And we can bait this with cat food or sardines or tuna fish, anything like that will work really well. Now the question comes up of, what do I do when I catch the skunk? So obviously we want to try to keep from getting sprayed. Now the thing you need to know about skunks is they're really docile and they're not prone to spray. And usually when you check the trap in the daytime, it's going to be asleep. They're mostly nocturnal. So what you want to do is walk up to that trap with something in front of you, like a big piece of burlap or an old blanket or a tarp or something like that, and just walk quietly, gently, softly up to the trap and lay the material over the trap, and then pick it up, and then you can take it somewhere where you can dispose of it. And similar to the armadillo, a quick shot to the neck will humanely dispatch that animal. If the trap is sprayed, you can mix up hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, and dish soap to try to reduce that smell, but mostly it'll just take time to wear off. Now, another big problem is skunk getting in your structures, under your home or under an outbuilding. If this is the case, first thing is to find how the animal's getting under there, and you're going to want to seal that entrance so that it can't get in. But if the skunk is in there, which it probably is if you're doing this during the day, as I said, they're nocturnal, so it's probably in the structure sleeping, you want to catch it first. So what you want to do is block off everything so that there's only one entrance, and then put your trap at the entrance so that the animal will just come in and get trapped. And then once you've removed all the skunks, and there might be multiple skunks, so make sure you do this for a few nights until you're not catching any anymore, then you can go ahead and seal that structure off. Sometimes tree squirrels cause problems for us in the landscape. We have 3 species here in Oklahoma. By far the most common is the fox squirrel, but we also have eastern gray squirrels that occur primarily east of I-35. And then finally there's southern flying squirrel, and these typically get in attics, although most people don't ever see these because southern flying squirrels are nocturnal. Now, the first issue that comes up a lot is squirrels accessing bird feeders. So the best way to keep them from doing that is put some type of cone. To fully exclude them, the cone needs to be like about 2 foot out from the pole or tree if you're putting it on some type of tree. But one this size will generally work. Now the problem with this one is it's really not high enough off the ground. It needs to be about 6 foot. Now this will keep a lot of squirrels off, but they can jump that high. They could actually jump to this feeder. So 6 foot if you want to absolutely keep them off of something. And similarly, the vegetation behind this feeder is too close, so they could actually climb in the vegetation and get on this feeder. As it's set up right now, this will eliminate a lot of the damage, but you're still going to have squirrels periodically get on a feeder like this because it's not quite high enough. Also, if you're trying to protect something like a pecan tree, you need to keep that 6 to 8 foot actually from tree to tree in mind, because if you put a cone on the base of a pecan tree, if there's other trees that are within 8 feet of that canopy, then they can access that pecan tree from other trees. So you'll need to put cones on every tree to keep them out, and that can be quite difficult. Now you can buy cones commercially, or you can make them yourself with sheet metal and then put around the base of the tree. If you are putting them on trees, be careful not to girdle that tree. Don't get it too tight so that you're not damaging the cambium. Now if you have squirrels attacking sweet corn, the best thing to do is to wrap a little filament reinforced tape lightly around the tip of the corn. That'll keep them from getting in the husk. And you need to do this a couple of weeks before the corn is mature, because they generally like to harvest it before you're ready to harvest it. And finally, if squirrels are getting in your attic, the first thing to do is find out how they're doing that. And you want to trap them before you seal that entrance. The best way to trap them is with a small trap similar to what you would use for a skunk, with a 7 by 7 inch opening. Bait it with peanut butter or nuts or fruit, and then remove those animals and seal that entrance. Flying squirrels are the ones that most commonly enter attics. If you're hearing at night when you're going to bed, if you're hearing scratching up in the attic, good chance you have flying squirrels, and you'll want to catch those animals before you seal that entrance. Cottontail rabbit is another species that sometimes cause damage in our garden and lawns. They have a very similar diet to whitetails. The main difference is that they can only access plants at about 12 to 18 inches off the ground. So generally, shrubbery and trees aren't damaged, except sometimes at the base where they will girdle trees. And when that happens, you can use some type of tree wrap to keep them from damaging the bark and the cambium of those woody plants. Generally, you want something with a pretty small mesh to protect against rabbit, like a quarter inch mesh. And if you can get it up about 2 foot off the ground, that'll be sufficient. Although if you're having deer damage too, it needs to be much higher than 2 feet, obviously. But plastic or metal mesh works really good to protect individual trees or shrubs. Now, if you're having problems with rabbits on herbaceous plants like garden plants or violets or other really tender annuals or perennials, you're going to need to do some other things. You can use repellents, but similar to deer, they're generally not highly effective for very long. You have to constantly reapply them, and you want to be using contact repellent, not area repellent. So a contact repellent being one, again, that you're going to need to spray directly on a plant. And for rabbits, you need to look for products that are thiram based. Those are going to give the best effectiveness at reducing damage. Some other things you can do is just try to select plants that rabbits don't consume, and there's plenty to pick from. And you can go on our website. We have a fact sheet that lists a lot of plants that deer don't consume, and the vast majority of those that will also apply for rabbits, so you can use that as a good starting point. One of the animals that causes a lot of nuisance problems in urban areas in Oklahoma is the northern raccoon. It's very abundant, widespread, and they typically like to do things like get in our trash can, eat dog and cat food, and they can make a lot of noise, get under decks. So there's several things you can do. Generally, repellents don't work very well, nor does frightening. The simplest thing on a raccoon is to trap it. They're really easy to trap, and we want to use a large trap like this one. It's 12 by 10 at the opening. And you can bait this with several things: sardines, cat food, really anything a dog would eat, a raccoon probably will too. So generally they're fairly easy to capture. They are a regulated fur bearer in Oklahoma, so you can't kill them legally without a license unless they're causing damage to poultry or livestock. But they can be trapped, and a professional can come in and remove those animals for you. And you can get on ODWC's website under their Nuisance Wildlife Control Operator site and find out who in your county might be able to help you with trapping raccoons. Alternatively, if they're just getting in like a trash can, the simplest thing is to use some type of bungee strap to secure the lid, to keep them from opening the lid, and you want to use some type of really heavy-duty plastic or metal so that they can't chew through the plastic and access what's inside, because they will do that if it's fairly lightweight material. The other thing that raccoons sometimes cause problems on are bird feeders, similar to what squirrels would get on the bird feeder and maybe damage the bird feeder or consume a lot of seed. And you can use a cone just like you would to exclude squirrels, about a 2-foot cone that's downward angled, and that should alleviate that problem for a northern raccoon. Whitetailed deer are a really common mammal species that occur across Oklahoma, and they're very popular for hunting and just wildlife viewing. A lot of people like to see them. But when they get in neighborhoods where we have a lot of ornamental plants, they can cause damage. Primarily, they feed on woody plants and vines, but they also do eat some tender herbaceous plants such as violets, and even some of our more expensive long-lived perennials like hostas. There's several things you can do to reduce the damage that whitetail deer cause to your landscape. One of the things that people typically turn to first is using some type of repellent. There's two types of repellents. There's area repellents and contact repellents. An area repellent is one that puts out an odor that animals would find offensive, and typical things that people try to employ are types of soap and human hair, etc. And generally these are not very effective and not recommended. Contact repellents, on the other hand, is something that you apply directly to the plant. And there's lots of commercial types available, but the ones you need to look for are products that contain putrefied egg solids and also thiram-based products. And those generally give between 50 and 80% effectiveness, depending on how desirable that plant is. Also, you need to remember that these products break down really quickly in sunlight, and if it rains, you need to reapply them, and you need to apply them to every part of the plant that you want to protect. So that does become a little cumbersome if it's a large area, but if it's a select few plants that you're trying to protect, they can really offer some good protection. But if it's a larger area that we're trying to protect, there's other things you might do. Generally, frightening devices don't work for deer. The notable exception would be dogs. If you have dogs in your neighborhood, particularly those that deer can see, such as ones that are held inside the yard by an invisible fence, generally that'll keep deer out as long as the dogs are present. Other things you can do is exclude the deer, and this is the only surefire way to make sure that deer stay out of an area. Unfortunately, it takes about a 10-foot fence to 100% keep a deer out of a plot. And these are usually only done for very high value areas such as maybe a large garden plot, but that's quite expensive. And if you, don't want to invest the money in a large 10-foot fence, then there are some other alternatives. One thing you can try is electric fence. And there's several configurations, but probably the simplest is just to use a single strand electric fence. And somewhere in the maybe 30-inch, 24 to 30-inch height off the ground. And you want to put about every 3 foot a piece of aluminum foil, which is a conductor. And we're going to bait this aluminum foil with a little bit of peanut butter. Just smear the peanut butter on the surface of the electric fence, and basically you're trying to coax the animal to get a shock and to habituate them hopefully away from that crop or a garden plot or whatever it is you're trying to protect. Now this is not 100%, but it can offer some protection. And we have a fact sheet at OSU that lists a lot of plants that are palatable or desirable and not palatable to white-tailed deer. And when you're talking about just ornamentals, that's probably the simplest thing to do, is just try to select plants that deer don't consume. And there's lots of them that you can choose. So if you'll go to our website and check out that fact sheet, you'll find lots of annuals, perennials, shrubs, and trees that deer generally don't bother. During the winter months, we receive a lot of calls from homeowners that are concerned about tree damage from woodpeckers. And generally, it's confined to the months of October, November, up till maybe February, March. And it's specific to a certain type of woodpecker that's actually called a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And they drill very shallow holes into the inner bark of the tree that brings sap to the surface, attracts insects, and then they come back and forage on those insects. Generally, the trees that they hit are ones that produce a lot of sap: pines, fruit trees, and also maples. Now most of the time this damage is really superficial and it doesn't cause disease or mortality. Occasionally it will. So if you're concerned about a particular tree that you really don't want to lose, even though the chances of that tree dying from this damage is low, there are some things you can do to try to exclude the woodpecker from the bole of the tree. So if the damage is only low in the tree, it's really easy to put up netting, chicken wire, metal flashing, or burlap, or something to exclude that animal from getting at the bark. And you can remove that once spring comes and the woodpeckers move back north for the year. If it's up higher in the tree, it's a little more difficult to deal with because it would require substantial wrapping of the limbs of the tree. If you have exposed wood on your home or other structures, you're probably going to have to deal with woodpecker damage at some point. There are a number of things that you can do to try to reduce that damage. One of the easiest is to put out a suet feeder. This is a mixture of fats, seeds, and fruits, and it's really attractive to woodpeckers, and it will help alleviate some of the damage, but not eliminate it. So once you start seeing damage on your house, you want to try to stop that as soon as possible. You don't want the woodpecker to become habituated to using your home to forage on. So a simple thing to do is to buy flashing like this. It's metal. You can cut it to whatever shape you want. Some of it's already pre-painted that matches a lot of wood colors, or you can prime it and paint it yourself. One final thing to remember about woodpeckers is they are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and cannot be legally killed.